The chandelier above the penthouse flickered, not from faulty wiring, but as if it too sensed the storm brewing beneath it. Manhattan's skyline glistened beyond the glass, unaware that in one gilded high-rise, a dynasty was about to crack. She stood by the window, one hand resting gently on her belly, the other clutching a phone that hadn't rung all night, not even on their anniversary. The silk of her gown caught the light like armor, but inside her, something far more dangerous than anger had begun to bloom. It wasn't just betrayal, it was erasure. And before the night was over, Vivien Caldwell would make sure that her silence would become the loudest scream in the city. On the night of their 5th anniversary, billionaire Grayson Caldwell made a catastrophic mistake. While his 7 months pregnant wife, Vivienne Aldridge Caldwell, waited at home beside a candlelit dinner for two, he was across town, wining and dining his mistress. He believed he was carefully orchestrating the end of his marriage on his own terms. A quiet, controlled demolition. What he didn't anticipate was Vivienne walking through the doors of that upscale restaurant. The explosion that followed wasn't just personal, it was public, humiliating, and powerful enough to rattle the foundation of his entire empire. Silence filled the Caldwell penthouse, an expensive, deliberate kind of silence. It was the hush of Persian rugs muffling steps across marble floors, the hush of triple-glazed windows that turned Manhattan's chaos into a faint, irrelevant murmur. Once, this stillness had brought Vivienne comfort. Now at 31, it felt like a tomb. She possessed a delicate kind of beauty that seemed both timeless and untouched, soft waves of golden blonde hair and eyes the stormy gray of a sky before rain. She moved with the quiet grace of generational wealth. Her family, the Aldridges, were Boston blue bloods, their fortune as discreet and enduring as the old estates they called home. Marrying Grayson 5 years ago had been as much a calculated alliance as it was romantic, a fusion of old prestige and his aggressively built tech fortune, made from daring acquisitions and ruthless timing. From the outside, they were the golden couple, an image of power and perfection. But Vivienne had been unraveling the illusion for months. She stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows now, one hand resting gently over the firm curve of her belly. After years of heartbreak, silence, and painful treatments, this baby had been their miracle. It was supposed to bring them closer, seal the fractures in their marriage. Instead, the cracks had deepened into canyons. Grayson had become a ghost in their home, present only in form. His 6'2" frame, always polished in bespoke suits, left only the lingering scent of cologne in rooms he exited too quickly. His attention, his warmth, his spirit, they were gone. He lived through the constant flick of his thumbs across his phone screen, a secretive smirk occasionally appearing when she asked who he was texting. The answer never changed. Short, dismissive, and mechanical. Work, Viv. Always work. Tonight marked their 5th anniversary. Vivienne had arranged everything, hired a private chef, filled the penthouse with the gentle melodies of her favorite pianist, and placed the sapphire earrings Grayson had gifted her on their 1st anniversary atop a silk napkin on the table. It was a hopeful, desperate attempt to reach for something they had lost. At exactly 6 p.m., Grayson walked in, tossing his briefcase carelessly onto the velvet chaise. He didn't kiss her. He kissed the air somewhere near her cheek. "Evening," he muttered, already loosening his tie. "Don't wait up. I've got a late dinner with the Tokyo delegation. We're finalizing the Kanzaki deal." Vivienne's heart, which had been fluttering with nervous hope all day, dropped like a stone. "Grayson," she said quietly, "it's tonight, our anniversary." He paused in the hallway, halfway to their bedroom. For a moment, there was a flicker in his eyes. Regret, maybe, but it vanished almost instantly, replaced by thinly veiled annoyance. "Damn. Right. Look, I'm sorry. This deal is huge. Billions are on the line. We'll celebrate this weekend. I'll take you anywhere. Paris for a few days? Just us." He didn't wait for an answer. He vanished into their cavernous walk-in closet. The Paris offer was a distraction, a well-rehearsed maneuver he used when he didn't want to face the present. It had worked before. It didn't work now. She followed him, the soft swish of her slippers trailing behind. "The chef's already here," she said. "I canceled my seat at the Children's Alliance benefit for tonight." He stepped out, freshly dressed in a crisp white shirt, adjusting his cufflinks with meticulous focus. "Then uncancel. or enjoy the meal. Give the chef a fat tip, we can afford it. The cruelty wasn't sharp, it was casual. That's what made it worse. She wasn't even worth an argument, just another item he was pushing to tomorrow's to-do list. "Where's the dinner?" she asked, voice low but unshaking. "L'Étoile," he answered automatically. "They're strict about punctuality." L'Étoile, the most exclusive French restaurant in the city. Intimate, luxurious, nearly impossible to book. The same place where he had once knelt and asked her to marry him. The irony was suffocating. A business dinner with Japanese investors at the most romantic restaurant in the city. The lie wasn't just insulting. It was calculated. It was an insult to her intelligence. She watched as Grayson spritzed his cologne, adjusted the platinum cuff of his Patek Philippe. He looked the part. Every inch the billionaire powerhouse, the media-dubbed titan of innovation. But to Vivienne, he looked like a stranger. "All right, Grayson," she said, her voice calm and composed, belying the chaos inside her. She gently smoothed the front of her silk maternity gown. "Have a successful dinner." He gave her a quick, satisfied smile, seemingly pleased by her unresisting compliance. "That's my girl. I'll make it up to you big time." He leaned in for another hollow air kiss, then walked out, the penthouse door closing behind him with a soft but definitive thud, like the final note in a symphony of heartbreak. The sound echoed through the room and through her. The silence returned, heavier than before. The aroma of pears and slow-roasted lamb, once comforting, now felt funereal. Vivienne walked slowly to the dinner table, elegantly set for two with polished crystal and shining silver. She stared at the empty chair where her husband should have been. A gentle kick from the baby brought her back, an unspoken reminder of the life inside her. The future she was still trying to believe in. The fight she was starting to understand wasn't about saving love. It was about surviving betrayal. She pulled out her phone, her fingers trembling ever so slightly. She didn't call her mother or her best friend. She called the one person in Grayson's circle she knew would always tell her the truth. The one man who'd seen everything and never spoken a word. "Mr. Pembroke," she said, her voice low but unwavering. "I need a favor. I need to know who Grayson's dinner reservation is with tonight." There was a pause on the other end. Mr. Pembroke, Grayson's longtime driver and personal assistant, was known for his unshakable discretion. His silence was already an answer. "Please, Alistair," she whispered, using his first name for the first time in years. "For me." Another pause, then a sigh, heavy, regretful. "Mrs. Caldwell, the reservation is for two, but the second guest, it's not a Mr. Kenzaki." The words hung in the air, confirmation of what she had already felt, deep in her bones. The tomb had cracked, and cold, bitter reality was beginning to seep in. Across town, Grayson Caldwell maneuvered his custom Aston Martin through the canyons of Manhattan with the same calculated grace he brought to every market negotiation. The thrill was palpable, a blend of power, guilt, and intoxicating freedom. Guilt, to Grayson, was a fleeting, inconvenient emotion. He had mastered the art of compartmentalizing. Freedom, on the other hand, that was the drug he craved. And Cassandra Vale was his latest and most potent high. He glanced over at the passenger seat. Cassie was everything Vivienne wasn't. Where Vivienne embodied timeless grace, Cassie was modern heat. Her jet-black bob framed a face made for bold statements. Her lips were painted in a daring crimson, and her laugh, sharp, wild, unapologetic, filled the cabin without restraint. She was 26, an ambitious, up-and-coming art curator he'd met at a private Art Basel after-party, a night Vivienne hadn't attended. She wasn't a gold digger, not exactly. That's what he told himself. She was driven, intelligent, and mesmerized not just by his money, but by his power. She made him feel young, vital, seen. Vivienne, with her philanthropic events, her quiet elegance, and now her pregnancy, had become a symbol of structure, of a life rooted in tradition and responsibility. A beautiful, suffocating cage. Cassie was the fire escape. "Are you sure about this, Gray?" Cassie asked, her voice low, velvety. She traced one manicured finger along the polished walnut trim of the dashboard. "Your wife? Your anniversary. It feels necessary," he cut in smoothly. He reached over, taking her hand in his, thumb brushing over her knuckles. "Viv and I? We've been drifting for years. The marriage, honestly, it's more of a merger now. The pregnancy, it wasn't planned. More like a last-ditch effort that worked when it shouldn't have. It's complicated." It was a flawless blend of half-truths and convenient lies. They had drifted, the IVF had been grueling. But calling it an accident? That was a self-serving rewrite. One meant to make him sound trapped, blameless. "This dinner, it's not for her," he said, voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "It's for us. It's time I stopped hiding you. It's time I lived life on my terms." L'étoile, it's symbolic. That's where one chapter of my life began, and tonight, it ends. Cassie's eyes, emerald bright, too young to see through him, widened. "Ends? You mean you're going to tell her?" "I'm going to start the process," he replied carefully. The words were chosen like a CEO crafting a press release, precise, vague, controlled. "This dinner is the beginning. A message. People will see us. It'll reach her. Better this way. Cleaner. No messy emotional meltdown at home." It was a breathtakingly cowardly and arrogant plan, conceived from a narcissism so deep Grayson actually believed it was rational. By being seen with Cassie, he would force the issue, create a public truth that couldn't be denied, one that would make the inevitable separation, Vivienne's reaction, not his decision. He wouldn't be the husband who walked away. He'd be the man who had already moved on. She would be the fragile wife who couldn't accept reality. He controlled the narrative. He always did. When they arrived at L'Étoile, the maître d', a severe-looking man named Antoine, greeted them with the kind of reverent professionalism reserved only for the city's elite. "Monsieur Caldwell, a pleasure. Your table is ready." Antoine's eyes flicked to Cassie for a brief moment. A flicker of recognition and surprise that he quickly buried. He knew Mrs. Caldwell well. Grayson didn't acknowledge it. He simply guided Cassie through the hushed, candlelit dining room, a space so curated and private that every table felt like a world of its own. The air was thick with the scent of white truffle and polished legacy. Heads turned, whispers trailed behind them like ripples on a still lake. He recognized several faces, a rival hedge fund CEO, a Broadway producer, even the editor-in-chief of a notoriously sharp gossip column. Perfect. He had reserved the best table in the restaurant, a secluded booth tucked into the corner with a breathtaking view of the park. It was the same table where he had once dropped to one knee and asked Vivienne to marry him. The cruelty was intentional, a demonstration of dominance, proof that he could rewrite history whenever he wanted. "It's beautiful," Cassie murmured, her earlier tension dissolving under the steady warmth of his self-assurance. "Only the best?" He replied smoothly, signaling for a bottle of Cristal champagne. He conveniently forgot that Vivienne's OBGYN had once asked him not to drink during the pregnancy in solidarity. That promise evaporated the moment the cork popped. His phone buzzed. A text from his COO about the Kanzaki deal. He typed out a quick reply, adrenaline flowing through him like electricity. He could handle it all. His empire, his wife, his mistress. Grayson Caldwell didn't break. The world shaped itself around him. "So," Cassie said, leaning forward, eyes glowing in the candlelight, "tell me about this new chapter. What does it look like?" Grayson smiled, the kind of slow, calculated smile that closed deals and opened doors. "It looks like you," he said. "It looks like my jet, not for a weekend in Paris, but a month in the Maldives. It looks like your face on the cover of Art World, with the Caldwell Foundation launching your new gallery. It looks like anything we want it to be." He was selling her a dream, and she was all in. Cassie had no reason to doubt him. Grayson had lied to her with the same smooth confidence he used in quarterly earnings calls, in board meetings, and at home across from his pregnant wife. In his mind, it wasn't deception, it was conviction. He believed the role he played. He wasn't just a man having an affair. He was the tragic, misunderstood hero, escaping a loveless cage to finally be with the woman he truly loved. He raised his glass. "To new beginnings." "To new beginnings," Cassie echoed, her flute clinking against his with a soft chime. Across the dining room, the gossip columnist subtly angled her phone, snapping a quick photo of the intimate toast. The ripples were already in motion, turning into waves. Grayson saw it, and he felt a vicious satisfaction. The fuse had been lit. All he had to do was wait for the blast. What he didn't know was that he was already sitting at ground zero. Back at the Caldwell penthouse, Alistair Pembroke's confirmation hit Vivienne's heart like a jagged shard of ice. She stood frozen in the middle of her lavish living room, phone still pressed to her ear. The aroma of the meal she had meticulously planned, seared scallops, black truffle risotto, drifted from the kitchen like a cruel joke. "The reservation is for 2. Alistair had said gently, "But the second guest? It's not Mr. Kenzaki." Betrayal, she discovered, wasn't just emotional, it was physical. It began as a cold knot deep in her belly, then spread like venom through her bloodstream, numbing, heavy, paralyzing. Her head swam, her limbs felt leaden. Her first instinct was to collapse, to disappear into the softness of her bed, bury her face in silk pillows, and let the sobs come. That would have been easy, expected. Typical Vivienne. Poised, graceful, quiet, but something inside her shifted. Beneath the devastation, a second emotion began to rise. It was slow at first, a low, simmering heat creeping up from the hollow place in her chest. Then it grew, faster, stronger, until it burned with a clarity that pushed the shock aside. Rage. It startled her. It didn't feel like her, but it cleansed her. It sharpened her edges, solidified her resolve. The baby kicked again, this time stronger, as if echoing her transformation. It wasn't a cry for comfort. It felt like a call to war. She wasn't just Vivienne Aldridge Caldwell, trophy wife, society darling. She was an Aldridge, a daughter of legacy, of statesmen, shipping empires, and women who had outlasted war, recession, and betrayal, with nothing but steel in their spines. Beneath the silk gloves and the perfect posture, she was a mother, one carrying a child who deserved far more than a coward for a father and a fool for a mother. The tears that had hovered on the edge of her lashes vanished. Her spine straightened, the delicate softness was gone, replaced by something sharp, crystalline. A resolve so clear it cut. She was done being the tragic figure in his narrative. Tonight, she would write her own chapter. "Thank you, Alistair," she said into the phone, her voice no longer fragile, but smooth and cold as glass. "You've been more of a friend to me than he's ever been a husband." She ended the call before he could respond. The fog of heartbreak had lifted. Her thoughts were electric, strategic. A new kind of strength bloomed inside her, fueled not by anger alone, but by fierce maternal purpose. The betrayal wasn't hers to carry anymore. It was his burden now. Hers was the responsibility to protect the life growing inside her. A life that deserved clarity, not chaos, a name unsoiled by shame. What was Grayson's plan? Public humiliation. He had picked L'Etoile on purpose, their place, knowing it would be filled with familiar faces. He wanted to be seen. He wanted the whispers, the headlines. He wanted the pain to reach her through other people. It was an attack by proxy. But she wouldn't allow it. There would be no proxy war. There would be confrontation. Vivien strode into the bedroom, not toward the closet filled with carefully chosen maternity dresses, the ones meant to project grace and domestic contentment. No. She went to the section she hadn't touched in months, the part of her wardrobe from before. Before the IVF, before the naive hope that a child could hold them together. She pulled out a dress made of deep crimson silk. It was bold. It was arresting. It was meant to cling, to command. It would stretch over her belly, unapologetically. She wasn't hiding. She was a woman, powerful, pregnant, and prepared for battle. As she applied her makeup, her hands were steady as stone. Her eyeliner sliced upward in a bold cat eye. Her lips were painted a dark vampiric red, the color of dried blood. She stared at her reflection. The woman looking back wasn't the same one Grayson had walked out on an hour ago. This woman was forged from fire and betrayal. She had nothing left to fear and nothing left to lose. This woman was a queen. The sapphire earrings he had given her on their first anniversary sat on the vanity. They felt wrong now, tainted. She left them behind. Instead, she fastened a pair of diamond and onyx earrings, Aldridge family heirlooms. They shimmered like armor. She walked back into the living room. Pierre, the private chef, glanced up from the stove, brow creased in concern. "Madame Caldwell, is everything all right?" "Mr. Caldwell, he's running late." "There's been a change of plans, Pierre," Vivienne said coolly, her tone leaving no space for protest. "Dinner is canceled. Kindly pack everything. Send the full invoice to my husband's office." She paused, her eyes locked with his, "and include a significant inconvenience fee." Pierre's eyes widened, but he said nothing, just nodded. "As you wish, madam." Vivienne stepped into a pair of stilettos, razor sharp, uncomfortable, and absolutely perfect. She picked up her clutch and phone. Before leaving, she paused by the dinner table, still elegantly set for two. With careful precision, she reached for the lone peony in the crystal vase, the one centerpiece she had chosen herself. She snapped its stem. The soft crack was quietly euphoric. No car service, no driver. She walked straight out to the Manhattan curb and hailed a yellow cab, the kind of transportation Grayson would have rolled his eyes at. As the city blurred around her, a rushing stream of gold and neon, she didn't cry. She didn't scream. She calculated. She thought about prenups, about Montgomery Tech bylaws, about the equity shares in her name, transferred there during their so-called merger of legacy and ambition. She thought about the Aldridge family legal team, high-powered attorneys whose ancestors had written state constitutions. Grayson thought this was personal. He forgot it was also corporate, and he was about to make a very, very poor investment. When the cab pulled up in front of L'Etoile, Vivienne didn't hesitate. She paid the driver, stepped out, and inhaled deeply, steadying herself. The doorman, accustomed to her elegant entrances on the arm of Grayson Caldwell, rushed forward, eyes wide with confusion. "Mrs. Caldwell, what a surprise." "I'm sure it is," she replied, her voice like a blade of frost. She swept past him. Her crimson dress cut through the restaurant's warm gold interior like a streak of fire. Every head turned. Conversations died mid-sentence. The whispers that had followed Grayson and Cassie now turned to silence. Shocked, reverent, electric. The gossip columnist's eyes nearly doubled in size. Her phone clutched like a holy artifact. This was tabloid gold in real time. Vivienne's gaze scanned the room. Composed, cold, unshakable, until it landed on their booth. There he was, laughing, leaning in toward a woman she had never seen before. Young, beautiful, radiant in the candlelight, seated in her place. She saw the bottle of Cristal. She saw his hand casually resting over the woman's. And in that single moment, Grayson Caldwell looked up. Their eyes met. His smile faltered, then collapsed entirely. The color drained from Grayson's face. He looked like a man witnessing the collapse of a carefully architected empire. A strategist whose flawless blueprint had just exploded in his hands. Vivienne began walking toward him. Each step was intentional, controlled. The sharp click of her stilettos echoed against the marble floor, rhythmic and ominous. It was the only sound in the room, like a clock winding down to zero. The storm hadn't just gathered, it had arrived. Her journey across the dining room felt like a mile. Every eye in the restaurant was on her. She could feel their stares like heat on her skin, a cocktail of pity, disbelief, and morbid fascination. The silence pressed against her body like air before a thunderclap, but she felt none of it. Her focus narrowed. There was only the booth, their booth, and the two people sitting inside it. Cassie Vale felt the energy in the room shift. First, the stillness, then the collective gasp. She turned her head and saw what everyone else was seeing. A woman, stunning, visibly pregnant, draped in a blood-red dress that clung to her like vengeance, was approaching with eyes as cold and unforgiving as glass. It took Cassie a beat too long to piece it together. The wife, the pregnant wife, the one he had said was a formality, a chapter he was in the process of closing. "Gray," she whispered, confusion and dread in her voice. "Who is that?" Grayson didn't answer, couldn't. He was frozen, caught in the devastating spotlight of his own recklessness. He had calculated whispers, predicted rumor, planned for subtle separation. He had not planned for this, for Vivienne. In the flesh, looking like a queen come to sentence him before the court of public opinion. She reached the table. Her eyes never moved to Cassie. They were locked on her husband. She stood still for a long moment, allowing the silence and stares to imprint this scene into memory. The billionaire, the mistress, the 7 months pregnant wife. "Grayson," she said, not loud but sharp, calm, controlled, each syllable soaked in venom. "I believe you're sitting in my seat." The words hit harder than any scream. Grayson flinched. He scrambled to rise, knocking his knee against the edge of the table. "Vivienne, what are you doing here? We can talk about this at home." "Home," she echoed and let out a short, cold laugh. "You mean that penthouse you occasionally remember exists between board meetings and jet rides?" She tilted her head slightly. "No, I don't think we will." "You wanted a public statement, Grayson," Vivienne said, her voice razor sharp. "Well, here I am. Let's give them one." Her gaze finally shifted to Cassie. She took in the younger woman's striking features, the couture dress, the dawning look of horror beginning to cloud her expression. Vivienne didn't see a rival. She saw another casualty of Grayson's bloated ego. "And you must be the Japanese investor," she said, her tone now dipped in ice-cold pity. "He does have a real flair for mergers and acquisitions, doesn't he?" She tilted her head, eyes narrowing slightly. "Tell me, did he promise you the world, a gallery maybe? A life without complications?" Cassie stared at her, stunned into silence. Vivienne had just spoken aloud the exact fantasies Grayson had sold her not 15 minutes ago. Word for word. The realization crashed over her. She wasn't a partner in some daring new beginning. She was a prop, a pawn. The hollow look in her eyes turned sharp, cutting back to Grayson with dawning fury. "What is she talking about, Gray?" Cassie demanded, her voice climbing. "Jen, stop it," Grayson hissed, his face blotchy and flushed. "You're making a scene." Vivienne recoiled as he reached for her arm, her expression one of revulsion as if his touch were poison. "A scene?" she repeated, her voice rising, cracking for the first time under the weight of all she'd been holding in. "A scene? You dare accuse me of making a scene?" Her voice echoed like thunder across the stunned dining room. "You bring her here, to our restaurant, on our anniversary, while I'm at home, pregnant with your child, and you want to lecture me about a scene?" The words reverberated through the hushed crowd. Cassie flinched as if slapped. This was the moment. The edge. The irreversible break. Vivienne looked down at the table, at the glinting champagne flutes, the scattered appetizers, the quiet symbols of his betrayal. All the lies, the pain, the humiliating strategy behind this evening. It surged inside her, a singular white-hot flame, and with a guttural cry torn from deep within her chest, she reached forward, gripped the edge of the solid oak table, and shoved. The crash was deafening. Crystal shattered, silverware clattered, food splattered across linen and floor. A $600 bottle of Cristal cartwheeled through the air, spraying a horrified banker nearby. A tray of oysters skidded off the edge and landed squarely in Grayson's lap. In seconds, the sleek, curated scene of seductive betrayal had been obliterated, replaced by chaos. Slippery, sticky, public. Gasps rippled through the room. Phones were raised. Red lights blinked through the dimness as people hit record. Grayson lurched to his feet, soaked in champagne and shellfish, his face contorted with rage. "Are you insane?" he bellowed. But Vivienne was already turning away. She hadn't flipped the table in hysteria. She had dismantled a monument to cruelty. It was destruction with purpose. Vivienne had just burned it all down. Their life, their illusion, their perfect lie, and she had done it on her terms. She took one final glance at the wreckage, the shattered table, the dripping champagne, her humiliated husband, and the stunned mistress left blinking in the debris of their sordid little fantasy. She felt nothing, just a clean, cold emptiness. Then, without another word, she turned her back on them, on him, on everything they had built. Her head held high, her crimson silk gown a blood-red banner in the wreckage. And as she reached the exit, she delivered her final blow, voice loud enough to cut through every pocket of silence in the room. "Enjoy the rest of your dinner, Grayson. Looks like the deal's off." Then she was gone. She left behind silence, the bitter scent of spilled wine, a disgraced billionaire, and the smoldering remains of a marriage. It wasn't just personal, it was strategic. The humiliation was total, and it was only the beginning. The aftermath of the table flip unfolded like a slow-motion disaster. For a moment, no one moved. The diners at Latois sat frozen, hostages to the greatest show in the city. Then the room broke. Antoine, the maitre, rushed forward, flanked by two waiters, not to confront Vivienne, but to clean up what was left of the carnage. His face was a tight mask of hospitality protocol and quiet panic. Grayson Caldwell stood at the epicenter, drenched in champagne, his custom Tom Ford suit clinging to him in soggy patches. An oyster absurdly dangled from the pocket square. The whispers returned, but now they were sharper, cruel, mocking. The flash of a phone camera pierced the low light. Catherine Reed, the gossip columnist, had her money shot. Grayson's shame radiated outward, hot and heavy like smoke from a fire. A man who curated his public image like a priceless brand campaign now stood as a viral meme in real time. A clown in his own high society circus. "Get out," he growled, turning to Cassie, his voice laced with venom. His grand performance had collapsed, and like every narcissist faced with failure, he needed someone to blame. Cassie was the closest, most fragile thing. Still dazed, still smeared in sauce and disbelief, she looked at him. The man who, not an hour ago, had promised her freedom, power, and a place in his future, now glaring at her like she was the problem. "Me?" she snapped, voice rising with fury. "You lied to me. You used me. You said it was over between you. You told me she wouldn't be there." Grayson clenched his jaw. "I told you to be discreet. I didn't tell you to sit there and let my wife ambush us." Grayson lied, clumsily, desperately, trying to rewrite the scene in his favor. "She ambushed us," he spat, reaching for some semblance of control. Cassie turned on him, her voice icy, her intelligence now fully awake and furious. "No," she snapped. "She ambushed you." She rose from the booth, brushing crumbs from her dress with the last ounce of grace she could gather. "You're a coward and a liar, and to think for a second, I almost felt sorry for you." She grabbed her purse and walked out. Her spine straight, her eyes forward, no parting glance, no second thought. She shoved past the gawking diners and vanished, leaving Grayson alone in the wreckage of his own making. Now abandoned by both his wife and his mistress, Grayson felt a violent urge to scream, to destroy something, anything, to reclaim some illusion of control. But the room was still watching. His peers, his rivals, and worst of all, his enemy. Alistair Finch, his chief competitor in the tech industry, was seated a few tables away, watching with gleeful amusement. He lifted his glass in a slow, mocking toast. The shame burned. It physically burned. Grayson slammed his black Amex down on the nearest clean surface. "Cover everything," he barked at Antoine. "And if a single photo from this room leaks, I'll buy this damn place just to fire you myself." It was a hollow threat. They both knew it. The story was already out. Catherine Reed was probably typing up the headline as she walked out the door. Caldwell collapse. Billionaire's anniversary dinner ends in disaster as pregnant wife crashes the party. As Grayson stormed toward the exit, his composure a brittle shell over a churning storm, he hit a fresh wall of hell. The doorman had tipped off the paparazzi. Flashes exploded around him like fireworks. "Grayson, is it true you were dining with a mistress?" "Mr. Caldwell, what's the status of your marriage?" "Who was the woman?" He shoved through the mob, face thunderous, shouts echoing behind him, and hurled himself into his Aston Martin. He sped off, tires screeching against the pavement, his only response. For the next hour, he drove aimlessly through Manhattan. The neon blur of the city meant nothing. His phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Calls, texts, his PR chief, his attorney, his mother. He ignored them all. He wasn't just embarrassed. He had been outplayed. Vivienne's eruption hadn't been the emotional collapse of a betrayed wife. It had been cold, sharp, tactical. From the dress to the stare to the table flip, it had all been theater. Corporate theater. And she had nailed the performance. She hadn't just ended their marriage. She had executed a hostile takeover of the narrative. He was no longer the powerful, poised executive writing the next chapter of his life. He was just a pathetic, exposed adulterer caught red-handed. Grayson finally drove home, back to the silent penthouse. He expected chaos, maybe broken glass, maybe her closet emptied. Instead, it was immaculate. The kitchen gleamed. The air smelled like nothing. The table for two had been cleared. Not a single trace of the dinner or the anniversary remained. The broken peony was gone. It was as though she and the entire evening had been surgically erased, except for one thing. A single sheet of paper lay on the hallway console. It wasn't a letter. It wasn't emotional. It was official. A document bearing the header of Aldridge, Finch, and Barrett, her family's powerhouse legal firm. It was a formal notice. Effective immediately, Vivien Aldridge Caldwell was filing for an injunction to freeze all jointly held assets, pending a formal review of their prenuptial agreement, citing gross marital misconduct. Grayson's breath caught in his throat. It got worse. As a major shareholder in Caldwell Innovations, Vivien was also calling an emergency meeting of the board. The agenda? The reputational and financial risk posed by the CEO's recent personal conduct. Grayson went cold. This wasn't a divorce. This was war. She wasn't coming for his heart. She was coming for his company. The table flip? The public shaming? That was just her opening move. The real battle, the one that would decide his legacy, his empire, had only just begun. He thought he'd been playing chess, but Vivien had flipped the entire board, and he was the only piece left in the rubble. While Grayson spiraled in the ruins of his image, Vivienne wasn't at home crying into monogrammed tissues. She was seated in a wood-paneled conference room in Midtown Manhattan, walls lined with oil paintings and antique books. The headquarters of Aldridge, Finch and Barrett. It was a fortress, old money decor, new money ferocity. With her were two men. One was Carter Barrett, a 60-year-old legal tactician known for dismantling his adversaries with surgical precision. His gaze was steely, focused. The other was her older brother, Donovan Aldridge. Where Grayson was slick and curated, Donovan was pure force. A former Marine turned venture capitalist with storm gray eyes that mirrored his sister's, but in a face shaped by war, not salons. He had never trusted Grayson. Not for a moment. "You did well tonight," Donovan said, his voice low, approving. "Jen," Donovan said, his voice a low rumble as he handed her a glass of water. "You took control. Now it's time to press the advantage." Carter Barrett slid a heavy binder across the polished mahogany table. "The injunction will be filed by 7 a.m., he said crisply. "By that point, he won't be able to move a single dollar from any joint account without our explicit approval." He flipped to a flagged section. "The call for the emergency board meeting has gone out to all members. Given Grayson's position as the public face of Caldwell Innovations, this implosion gives us a considerable amount of leverage." Vivienne nodded, her focus unshakable. The emotional chaos had cleared. In its place stood a strategist, cold, clear, ready. "The prenup," she said. Grayson had always called it his ironclad fortress. "Every fortress has a back door," Carter replied with a tight smile. "Grayson built it to protect his premarital assets, which is standard. But Clause 11B, the infidelity clause, that's our breach point. He assumed it would simply force a higher settlement payout to you." Carter looked directly at her now. He never imagined it could be used to question his fitness to serve as CEO in a company where you hold a significant contractually protected stake. Donovan leaned in, his voice fierce. "Your shares, Jenny, that 10%? When you married him, Dad insisted it not be a wedding gift. He made it a check, a balance against power." Grayson's behavior, Donovan continued, was now more than just a personal embarrassment. It's a liability, a risk to the company's image, to its stock price. The board has a fiduciary duty to act. This wasn't just a divorce, it was the Aldridge gambit. They were turning scandal into strategy, pain into leverage. Grayson had underestimated her. Worse, he'd underestimated the family she came from. But amid all the cold calculations and boardroom planning, Donovan's face suddenly softened. He looked at his sister not as a fellow strategist, but as the girl he had once protected on the playground. "Jen," he said quietly, "are you okay, really?" He leaned closer. "Forget the money, forget the company. What he did to you, to the baby." Vivienne's mask cracked for the first time. A single tear broke free, carving a silent path down her cheek. "He killed what was left of us, Donnie," she whispered. "And he did it on purpose." Donovan's expression darkened, fury rising beneath his composed exterior. "He was always a snake," he growled. "I never understood what you saw in him, especially after what he said at the club." Vivienne stilled. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice brittle. Donovan hesitated, exchanging a quick glance with Carter, then back at her. "A few months ago, I ran into him at the club. He'd had too much scotch." He looked down for a moment, jaw tight. I congratulated him, cautiously, on the pregnancy, and he just laughed. Vivienne's heart sank. He said something like, "A miracle, that's what she calls it. Or maybe just good timing from the mailman." "He implied, Jen," Donovan said quietly, "he implied the baby isn't his." The air vanished from Vivienne's lungs. It wasn't just betrayal, it was annihilation. This went deeper than adultery, deeper than deception. Grayson hadn't just cheated on her. He had suspected her of being unfaithful, and used that suspicion as a justification for his own. He had weaponized a lie that desecrated the one miracle they had fought so hard for. He had poisoned their child, emotionally, before it was even born. A sick, hollow ache bloomed in her chest, as though her ribs were collapsing inward. She gripped the arm of the chair, not for drama but because her knees might not hold. This wasn't just marital decay. This was character rot. The man she had trusted with her body, her future, her child, had not only betrayed her but dared to question the sacred truth of her motherhood. Vivienne's voice shook as she whispered, "But why?" "He knows," she continued, trembling. "He knows his issues. 2 years ago, after a serious illness, a specialist had delivered Grayson devastating news. His chances of fathering a child naturally were slim to none. The diagnosis had cut him to the bone, attacking the very foundation of his self-image. It had been her idea to try IVF, her hope. Grayson had agreed, but reluctantly, detached, cynical, already resigned to failure. And now the cruelest twist of all, the secret she had been carrying, the one she was going to reveal tonight. A final anniversary gift, a miracle. She looked at Donovan, her voice cracking. "He's wrong, Donnie," she said, almost inaudible. "He's so wrong." She reached into her clutch and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. She had kept it close all night, a charm of hope now reduced to a symbol of heartbreak. She slid it across the table. Donovan unfolded the page. His eyes scanned the technical language until they landed on the line at the bottom. Probability of paternity, 99.9% subject, Grayson Caldwell. He looked up at his sister, his face stunned, stricken. "Oh my God," he whispered. "He doesn't know." Vivienne nodded, another tear sliding silently down her cheek. "No," she said. "The last round of IVF, it worked. I wanted to surprise him tonight. I wanted to show him he hadn't failed, that we hadn't failed, that we had our miracle. His miracle." Her voice cracked again, and for the first time all evening, the weight of the truth seemed almost unbearable. She had imagined his face lighting up, the moment of shared joy, the healing. But that fantasy had been shattered by his arrogance, crushed under the heel of his insecurity. The irony was unbearable. All of it, the affair, the lies, the humiliating spectacle. It had been built atop a foundation of bitterness and mistaken pride. He had destroyed everything he claimed to want, at the exact moment it had finally come true. He hadn't just betrayed his wife, he had betrayed his own unborn child in the most unforgivable way possible. The lawyer, who had been silent through it all, finally cleared his throat. Carter Barrett looked at the paternity test, then at Vivienne. The hawk-like sharpness in his eyes softened, just slightly, with something rare from a man like him, human sympathy. "This," he said, his voice low and steady, "changes everything." There was weight behind those words, not just legal weight, but moral. The kind of gravity that shifted fault lines. He had seen scorched earth divorces, vendettas masked as litigation, but never had he seen something this precise, this personal, so quietly devastating. He offered no more words. Just the acknowledgement, unspoken but understood. She had been right all along. 3 months later, New York was cloaked in autumn. The leaves in Central Park had turned to molten gold and copper. The city moved as it always did, fast, loud, unforgiving, but the world of Grayson and Vivienne Caldwell had changed irrevocably. The fallout from what the tabloids dubbed the L'Etoile incident was swift and brutal. Catherine Reed's column had gone viral. The grainy cell phone footage of the infamous table flip had become a meme sensation. Twitter had exploded. Cable news dissected every second. Caldwell Innovations stock plummeted 15% overnight. The emergency board meeting was a bloodbath. Armed with the infidelity clause, the PR catastrophe, and quiet but immovable pressure from the Aldridge camp, the board gave Grayson an ultimatum. Step down as CEO and take a leave of absence, or be forcibly removed in the most public, humiliating way imaginable. He stepped down. His empire, a monument to his vanity, was now under the watchful eye of a caretaker board, heavily influenced by Donovan Aldridge. In the following weeks, Grayson descended into a private hell. Carter Barrett had hand-delivered the paternity results. The news that his child, was unequivocally his, a miracle son, confirmed by a recent ultrasound. It did not bring relief. It destroyed him. It rewrote every lie he'd told himself, every cruel decision, every smug dismissal. The betrayal wasn't just of his wife, it was of his own future, torn apart by the very hands that had once built empires. In an instant, his narrative crumbled. He wasn't a wronged husband acting out of pain, he was a fool. A Shakespearean-level fool who had torched everything he ever wanted because of insecurity and ego. His phone stopped ringing. Friends disappeared. Invitations vanished. He became a social leper, alone in the penthouse, the king of nothing, haunted by the ghost of the life he had incinerated. Meanwhile, Vivienne flourished. She had moved out of the sterile penthouse and into a historic Aldridge brownstone on the Upper East Side, a family property, rich with legacy and peace. She shed the Caldwell name. She was Vivienne Aldridge again. And her pregnancy was no longer tabloid fodder. it was admired. She wasn't the betrayed wife anymore. She had become something else entirely. Not a symbol of scandal, but of strength. A modern matriarch in the making. Vivienne Aldridge graced the cover of Forbes. Not as a socialite, but as a powerhouse businesswoman who had defended her family's legacy and her own self-worth. The headline read, "The Aldridge Ascent: How Vivienne Aldridge Turned Betrayal into a Boardroom Triumph." Now in her final trimester, she radiated a quiet power. The delicate, fragile beauty was gone, replaced by formidable grace. She led her charitable foundations with renewed energy and took an active, respected seat on the board of Caldwell Innovations. Vivienne Aldridge had become a force. Every camera that once hunted her down for scandal now followed her for inspiration. Every whisper that had questioned her strength was silenced beneath the weight of her poise and control. She didn't just survive the storm, she rebuilt in its wake, brick by brick, stronger and more unshakable than ever before. The day her son was born dawned crisp and golden, a perfect October morning. She named him Arthur Maxwell Aldridge. She gave him her name, not his father's. The name was not just a legacy, it was a message, a declaration that her son's future would be carved from a different stone, free of the shadows of betrayal. A week later, Grayson made one last desperate move. He appeared at the brownstone unannounced. The man who once commanded boardrooms now looked like a ghost. He had lost weight. His bespoke suit sagged off his frame. His eyes were hollowed out by sleepless nights and self-inflicted misery. The door was answered by Donovan. "She doesn't want to see you," he said flatly. "Please," Grayson rasped. "Donovan, please. I just want to see him. I need to see my son." From inside, Vivienne's voice rang out, clear and steady. "Let him in, Donnie." Donovan stepped aside, but his glare was thundercloud dark. Grayson walked into the sunlit living room. It was warm, alive, filled with fresh flowers, soft blankets, and the quiet breath of a sleeping newborn. It was everything his penthouse was not. Vivienne sat in a wide armchair, cradling the baby. Arthur was swaddled in a pale blue blanket, his tiny features relaxed in peaceful sleep. Grayson stopped a few feet away, barely breathing. He looked at his son, then at her. All of it, regret, shame, love, was etched into his face. "Vivienne, he faltered. "There are no words. I know that. Sorry feels like a joke. I was a fool. I was broken, and I destroyed everything around me." Vivienne looked at him, her expression unreadable. "You were," she said softly, not unkindly, but not forgiving either. "And your brokenness," she added, "is not my burden to carry, not anymore." He stepped closer, desperate. "Let me fix it. I'll do anything. Therapy, lawyers, mediation, anything. We can try again. For him." He gestured to Arthur, his voice cracking. Vivienne's eyes sharpened. "For him?" she repeated coldly. "You do not get to use our son as a bargaining chip to rebuild your shattered ego, Grayson." Her tone was ice. "Let me be perfectly clear. We are never, ever getting back together. You destroyed that chance. You burned that bridge and salted the earth behind it." Grayson's face crumpled. Whatever flicker of hope he'd clung to, it died. But then her voice shifted. It softened, just slightly, as she looked down at the tiny infant in her arms. "He is your son," she said. "He is innocent, and he deserves to know his father, if his father proves himself to be a man worthy of knowing." She stood and walked toward him. With slow, deliberate grace, she held out the baby. "You may hold your son." Her arms didn't tremble, her stance didn't waver. But inside, something shifted. Not for Grayson, but for Arthur. Because no matter what had been shattered between them, this child deserved the truth, the warmth of both parents. The beginnings of trust, carefully rationed. His hands shook as he reached out. Arthur was impossibly small, warm, real. Grayson looked into the baby's face, and for the first time in his adult life, he began to cry. Not out of self-pity, but out of loss. Tears slipped silently down his cheeks, soaking into the soft blue blanket. He had imagined fatherhood as a triumph, a legacy, something earned and owned. He never pictured it like this. A fragile, trembling gift he was barely allowed to touch. A deep, soul-wrenching grief for the family he could have had. For the man he should have been. "He will have the Aldridge name," Vivienne said, her voice steely once more. She was no longer a scorned wife, but a sovereign matriarch laying down the terms of surrender. "You will be granted supervised visits. They will increase only if you demonstrate real, sustained change. You will contribute to a trust in his name, which I will manage. "You are not my husband anymore, Grayson. You are Arthur's father. And that is a privilege you will have to earn every single day." She watched him, her gaze no longer filled with love or hatred, but something stronger. Resolve. She had survived, she had triumphed. And as she looked at the child, now gently stirring in his father's trembling arms, she understood. This was only the beginning. Her new life, built from the ashes of betrayal, had just begun. In the end, the Caldwell Empire wasn't brought down by a financial crisis. It was undone by a single, fearless act of defiance. Vivienne Aldridge had turned her deepest humiliation into her greatest weapon, reclaiming not just her dignity, but her power. She proved that true strength isn't measured in shares or headlines. It's measured in the courage to walk away from a toxic kingdom and build your own. Grayson Caldwell lost everything because he saw his pregnant wife as a liability. He never realized she was his most valuable and most dangerous asset. So the story is over. Our wonderful friends, are you still here at this hour? If you are, then something about this tale must have touched your heart. And maybe, like Vivienne, you're standing at a crossroads of your own, between heartbreak and healing, silence and reclaiming your voice. What this story reminds us is simple but profound. Our strength doesn't come from never being broken. It comes from the decision to rise after being shattered. Vivienne Aldridge walked through the fire of betrayal and came out not just standing, but standing taller. She didn't just survive, she evolved, from silence to strategy, from victim to visionary. Her story is a masterclass in grace under fire and the triumph of self-worth over societal image. "Sometimes the people we love the most are the ones who teach us the hardest lessons," said Paulo Coelho. And perhaps those lessons are the ones that carve out space inside us, for clarity, for wisdom, for rebirth. In your own life, you might not be flipping tables in Michelin-starred restaurants, but maybe you're setting quiet boundaries. Maybe you're choosing peace over performance. Maybe you're finally saying, enough. That's strength. So if this story moved you, share it, pass it on. Let someone else be reminded that dignity, once reclaimed, becomes a kind of crown no one can take. Like, share, subscribe. Not just for stories, but for reminders like this. Because somewhere out there, someone's still trying to rebuild after the collapse, and they need to know. You can lose everything and still win your life back. Thanks for staying with us. See you in the next story.